If there is something that marked the 2021 and 2022 season, that has to be the sprint races. These events are held on Saturday and they determine the starting grid on Sunday. This is something that the F1 drivers are finding hard to accommodate for multiple reasons. Max Verstappen spoke about this issue, but he isn't alone in this quest to bring changes to the sprint race events. So what is going to change in the future? Before we dive deep into the philosophies of sprint races, as well as the changes that are set to take place in the near future, make sure to like our video, subscribe to our channel and turn on the notifications. Sprint races are events that give the drivers points on Saturday after the qualifying order for them is set on Friday. When they were implemented for the first time last year, they were seen as very interesting and shake-up-worthy events. However, it became evident quickly that they aren't adding any value to the race, as the drivers are all cautious due to the fact that they don't want to lose points or starting positions for Sunday. On Friday, there is one free practice session and then the qualifying order for the sprint race begins. On Saturday, there is another free practice session and the sprint race is underway. And on Sundays, the drivers are starting in the order they finished on Saturday. Last year, the first 10 places received points, while this year, the first 8 are awarded points. What doesn't seem conventional for the F1 drivers is that the sprint race itself isn't a standalone event. This would mean that it has nothing to do with the starting grid on Sunday, and if this sees the light, then rest assured that the drivers will risk much more when it comes to obtaining points on Saturday. And this is the narrative that prevails in many drivers, including the two-time world champion Max Verstappen. The Dutchman hasn't been quite supportive of sprint races in general and has constantly called for changes in the format. However, it seems like his voice will finally be heard as the FIA plans to introduce the sprint races as separate events. Going into the first sprint race this season, Verstappen spoke yet again about how he feels about the sprint races, adding, "Honestly, I'm just not a big fan of it because I feel like we don't really race. There are a few points that you get, but you also know that you can't really risk it because the main race is where you really get the points. You don't do a pit stop, so you just put on the tire which will last the distance, right? With these cars, probably the racing is a little bit better, but overall, you don't really see a lot of overtaking unless there is a car out of position. So then, yeah, it's not really that fun for me." It goes without saying that the sprint races are causing a lot of controversy, but they are an integral part of the F1 season, and they aren't going to disappear in the near future. However, they are going to withstand some changes, and the changes are exactly what the F1 drivers are looking for. Kevin Magnussen, the Haas driver, spoke about the sprint races, saying that Max's point is a valid one, adding, "Max has a good point that the risks that you want to take in the sprint are less because it decides the position for Sunday. So I think maybe a good tweak could be to separate that so you can go for it." But who is the other executive that spoke about the F1 sprint races? The managing director Ross Brawn spoke about the first ever sprint race at Silverstone last year, and ever since this sprint race was introduced, the drivers have been pushing for a standalone. And the sport is open to making it happen. I think that will be probably the key issue, whether we make another step and make it stand alone. I think that we'll have to look at the number of points awarded and how do we determine the starting grid. So should it just be what was done on Friday? As you know, Perez dropped out at Silverstone in the sprint, and then obviously his Sunday race was heavily compromised. So, should we determine the starting order on Friday for both Saturday and Sunday? Verstappen spoke yet again about the sprint races and the fact that the 2023 season will see 6 races. But he urged attention to the fact that changes need to be made to the format, adding, "I know that of course we will have 6 next year, but I mean, we can come up with these things to discuss if we rant it in a different way to maybe make it a bit more exciting, at least for me, but we'll see." Even though Verstappen is one of the biggest critics when it comes to sprint race, there are certain aspects of it that catch his eye. One of these things is him going straight into qualifying to set the sprint grid after just one practice session. According to him, the need for more sessions isn't something that's necessary, adding, "I do like the one practice session and then going straight into qualifying. I don't mind that because it's less practice for everyone to get fully up to speed and you need to really nail the setup, so that's okay." But I always feel a bit like that when I go into a sprint race. I'm not really risking a lot and just want to play safe. Verstappen received the support of Magnussen, with the Haas driver sharing the same narrative when it comes to entering a qualifying session without having too many practice sessions. I enjoy going from practice 1 straight into qualifying, like Max says, as it puts a lot of pressure on you to find a rhythm quickly and get the setup right. When there's 3 practice sessions, it's quite a lot, but anyway, I kind of like it. Still, the critics from Verstappen aren't really stopping when it comes to the integrity and the whole existence of the sprint race. For example, we are due to see 6 sprint races in 2023, which is 100% more than what we saw in 2022. This isn't something that Verstappen is a huge fan of, and it goes without saying that he dominated the sprint races in 2022. Still, there is something in the very core of this that makes it so unlikely for the 2-time world champion. Verstappen spoke a couple of days ago about the philosophy of the sprint race, saying that the F1 drivers need to just get into the race directly rather than waste tires and attention to the sprint races. Every time I do these sprint races, it's about don't get damaged, make sure you stay in the top 3. For me, that's not really a race because you go into the main race and you know there are way more points available anyway. You just risk a bit more there. You do another start in the sprint race, which is exciting, but it's only really people who are out of position that move forward because you just put a tire on that lasts a whole stint and not much happens. Continuing his argument about the main races and the sprint ones, Verstappen said that according to him, the sport should stick to the main event and not try to make it interesting on the cost of the driver. I don't understand what the problem is with that sticking to the main race, because we've had so many exciting races, so you don't need to add 1/3 of a race distance. Everyone is so careful anyway, because if you're fighting for third and you have a little touch and you drop to last, you know your Sunday is going to be tough. Probably you won't risk it, so that's not really a race. According to the 7-time world champion Hamilton, the FIA needs to be very selective when it comes to scheduling sprint races because there aren't many tracks that are suitable for these types of events. Hamilton said that the favor should be put on tracks where overtaking is easier, adding, "We've had the same Thursday to Sunday for God knows how long. It was supposed to be a 3-day weekend this year, and then they changed it back to 4 days, which I wasn't too happy about. The races are not always the greatest. It does create a few more options, but sometimes there's no overtaking, so we should hopefully learn from the races where there's been no overtaking in the sprint races. Putting them in places like Brazil that creates a lot of opportunity, or somewhere like Baku is going to be the best places for overtaking. I'm not against it, as long as they're selective of where they put it. What do you think about the sprint race format? Let us know in the comments below.